Hello, welcome to Behind the Wall. I'm Stan Grant. Prime Minister Scott Morrison will join other leaders of the Quad Security Alliance for historic virtual summit this weekend. Mr. Morrison says the meeting with US President Joe Biden, India's Narendra Modi and Japan's Yoshihide Suga will send a strong message to the region about Australia's support for an independent Indo-Pacific. But what is the Quad and what kind of message does the meeting send to our biggest trading partner, China? Hugh White is Professor of Strategic Studies at the Australian National University, and he joins me now from Canberra. Hugh, glad to have you with us. I want to just start with what can we expect from this Leaders Quad meeting?
Look, Stan, I think we can expect a strong diplomatic statement of alignment between these countries in trying to build a sort of a coalition to contain China. I'm not sure that we can expect much in the way of actual action, real concrete measures to put flesh on that bone. So I guess we'll also see a fair bit of talk about other problems. I think the White House has already foreshadowed that they'll be talking about climate change issues, the pandemic, of course, economic recovery. So it'll be quite a diverse agenda, although deep down inside, of course, we know that China's the thing that really draws these four countries together.
Yeah, and can we expect, Hugh, any movement on more joint military exercises? Because we know that India had invited Australia and Japan to join them with the US as well in exercises. Is this something we're likely to see formalised as time goes on?
Look, I think we easily could. I think all the parties have got an interest in promoting the idea that the four of these countries are drawing more closely together, are cooperating more closely in order to respond to the challenge that they all see from China. The problem for that is whether or not they're really prepared to take the big measures that are going to be necessary in order to really change the way China behaves. It's easy, you know, holding joint exercises looks good in a press release, but does it really convince China that it would face serious resistance from these four countries if it keeps pressing in future the way it has for the last few years? And I'm unpersuaded that it does. Joint exercises only go so far as a real demonstration of resolve. In the end, all of these countries... Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on that, Hugh. Is that because China is a much stronger military country now? It's increasing its capacity. Is this because of Xi Jinping and his increasing assertiveness, if not aggressiveness? What would it take to send that message to China?
Look, a really good question, Sam. I think right at the heart of it is not just the fact that China has become so much stronger militarily over the last decade or so, and it certainly has, but also the fact that it's become so much more potent diplomatically. And right at the heart of that, of course, is its extraordinary significance economically to all of the four countries of the Quad, and also its significance, I think, particularly for the United States in dealing with other issues that are high on the Biden administration's agenda, like climate change, for example. Now, the new team in Washington, new administration in Washington, talks a lot about standing up to China, but they also talk a lot about cooperating with China on those key issues. And we know, for example, that climate change is right at the top of Biden's agenda. And so I think, despite all the tough talk, it's very hard to persuade the Chinese that when push comes to shove, these four countries are really going to cooperate together in pushing back against China. And as long as that doesn't happen, then all the diplomacy and the virtual meetings and the press releases and so on don't really amount to very much in terms of hard strategic deterrence. And hard strategic deterrence is what's going to be required to push a very ambitious leader like Xi Jinping back from the sort of course he's been taking over the last few years.
I just want to pick up on that line that Prime Minister Morrison has been putting out, and that is that the Quad wants an independent Indo-Pacific. What does that mean, Hugh? Or does that mean that it wants a status quo Indo-Pacific where the United States is the predominant power? Where does China fit into this idea of an independent Indo-Pacific? How do you read that?
Look, it's a really key point, because I think you're right to say that when Morrison and co talk about an independent Indo-Pacific, they really mean the old Indo-Pacific, the one we all grew up in, the one where the United States was the dominant power and China accepted America's leadership. What they fear, and I think they're correct to fear this, is that China seeks to dominate the Indo-Pacific, or at least dominate the Western Pacific and East Asia, up to, you know, the Straits of Malacca, and that this would therefore be a region which was not independent of Chinese hegemony. But I think the problem for all of us is whether the United States really has the will and the resources to push back hard enough against China to resist that challenge. And of course, right at the heart of the Quad is the idea that India will be there to help. But I don't think India cares too much about what happens on the other side of the Straits of Malacca. They care a lot about what happens in South Asia and the Indian Ocean. But once you get into East Asia and the Western Pacific, I don't think India really cares that much. So I think there's a lot of wishful thinking embedded in the Quad.
And Hugh, America's resolve, its staying power is being tested because there are red lines everywhere, and red lines that involve the countries in the Quad. There, of course, are territorial disputes between Japan and China. There is a border dispute between India and China, and there were casualties last year when those two countries came to blows over that. Of course, there is the South China Sea as well. So in terms of those red lines and where or if they would be enforced, what are the challenges presenting the United States leadership and the Quad and the role Australia could play?
Well, precisely. The real question there is, in the event of one of those red lines being crossed, and the other one, of course, I
Taiwan,
which is in some ways the biggest of them all. The big question is, if China does cross those red lines, if we see a really large-scale conflict between India and China, for example, up on their mountainous border, or a really serious flaring crisis in the East China Sea around the Senkaku-Daiwa Islands, or heaven forfend, a brewing conflict over Taiwan, would all of these countries act together? And I'm far from sure they would. If you're the American president and you're faced with a choice as to whether or not you're going to really go in, for example, to support Taiwan in the event of Chinese military action, it's a terribly difficult choice, because we know now, because of the great strides that China's made, that the United States can no longer count on a quick, easy, cheap win over China in the Western Pacific and a war over Taiwan the way it would have been able to 20 years ago. And there's a real risk that that conflict would not just drag on, but would escalate, and perhaps even escalate into a nuclear exchange. So a president facing that choice has got a very tough choice indeed. And likewise, if you're Japan or India or Australia, do you decide to join that war with no guarantee of a quick outcome over Taiwan? Significant though Taiwan is, I think it's a much harder choice than many people understand.
Hugh, appreciate your thoughts. Thank you again for giving us your time.
My pleasure. Thanks, Stan.